hide the poll, and Adam, if you're ready, I'm going to make you presenter.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, everyone, have a great session.
All right, well, welcome everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about what's new in Analysis Services 2012, and don't be alarmed when you see my screen. There's a PowerPoint up there. I have exactly 3 PowerPoint slides, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time doing demos and walking through some of the new functionality in Analysis Services 2012. So pretty exciting stuff. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us today. You guys know Analysis Services is a place where I spend a lot of time, so it's kind of a nice little passion area of mine. If you guys need more info or need to reach out to me after the session, you can find me over on Twitter at AJBigData, or you can email me at adam@pragmaticworks.com. All right? So, NBA Finals, Game 5 tonight. I'm pretty excited. My Miami Heat have a chance to clinch their championship. So we got some hot new stuff we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about tabular modeling, the new BI semantic model. What does that mean? You see BISM or BISM. You hear that talked about all over the place. We'll talk a little about self-service, and there's a number of other things that went in to 2012, largely focused around things like MDX fixes, DAX integration, some new DAX query functionality, but all of that really is predicated on having that tabular model in place. And so we're going to spend most of our time talking about the new BI semantic model, the new tabular model, and what that means. So the folks over at Redmond Building 34 got together and they decided, we really need to be able to provide a more 360-degree modeling experience, a little bit more power to our end users, so to speak. And being able to do that has given them a lot of flexibility. We're going to show you a little bit today what that new functionality looks like and how that works and how you can get started with it. And the cool thing is it's very, very easy to get started with. And those of you that are familiar with Powerpivot already, you'll be able to get started even faster. So one of the things that I want to mention is this term BI semantic model. So Microsoft decided, look, if we're going to make analysis services bigger, better, badder, add new features, we can't just call it analysis services anymore. Everybody else has this semantic model. I'm making air quotes, but you can't see them. So we need to make sure that we have a semantic model. We've got to keep up with the Joneses. So we're going to take analysis services, we're going to rename it. And it's basically going to be BI semantic model multidimensional, which is going to be your extension of your traditional analysis services, and BI semantic model tabular, which is going to be the new stuff that we're going to talk about today. So not a lot of changes to the existing framework for multidimensional analysis services, except for the fact that now we do that work in Visual Studio 2010 as opposed to 2008 R2 for bids like we were used to. So now we're in Visual Studio 2010. We're up with the times. We're modern. We're rocking. And now we've added this new piece of functionality called tabular modeling. And so that's what we're going to spend most of our time talking about today. All right? So with that, it's showtime. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and build out a new tabular model. I'll talk about what it is, why it's important. We'll go through and kind of clean it up, prep it for deployment, look through a number of different features and pieces of functionality that we have there, look at some cool things that we can do with that tabular model now that we have it built, including being able to build things on the new Power View reporting platform and a number of different things. So we got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in, and I won't make you guys stare at LeBron James anymore. And the first thing that we're going to do is come over here to Visual Studio. And I've already got a tabular model up here. This is one we might use a little bit later. It's kind of pre-built a little bit, just cleaned up a little bit. But we're going to build one from scratch to give you guys the full experience. So you'll notice in here now we have new projects, right? We still have our old analysis services projects. We can still import from server. We can also import from server tabular. And what does that mean? Well, now in SQL Server, we have our original regular SQL Server relational engine. We also have our regular analysis services, multidimensional instance. We also now have this new type of instance called a tabular instance, and mine is named /tabular. It doesn't have to be that way. But you'll notice it's got this little blue grid kind of looking icon right there, right? So not a cube, but more of a tabular type grid type scenario. So when we deploy things, when we import, when we work with it, that is a different type of instance for multidimensional. You cannot mix and match. They can, of course, share the same server, but they need to be installed separately. They're different instances. Now you can change the type on the instance, but it's an all or nothing. So if you don't want to reinstall and you want to change the type, you can do that based on what you think you're going to need. All right. So a little bit of background on the tabular instance and the tabular model. The tabular model is designed to be essentially a server-level, enterprise-ready version of like what Powerpivot does. All right, so we're going to be able to come in here and create a new tabular project. I'm going to call this webinar time. And we're going to go ahead and say OK, and we're going to get a new project over here. And you'll notice it's called webinar time. My model name, we only get one model here. I'm going to call this webinar. I don't have to rename it. I just like to. And there's a couple of key properties that you want to notice here. So, what if there we go. If I could learn how to use my my Visual Studio here. Sorry about that. Let's make that a little bit better. And let's dock that. Okay, good. So if we look at our actual database project here, it's Analysis Services project for Tabular. Not a lot of properties there, right? But if we come down here to our model, now we've got some properties. So we need to be connected to a workspace server. So Tabular is designed for mostly in-memory work. So it's going to do all the heavy lifting in memory wherever it can. Now that doesn't mean that it won't page to disk if you run out of memory, but it's designed as a columnar type storage structure. So it's very highly compressed data. It's usually very quick data retrieval based on what you're trying to do. We also have this direct query mode. That's like roll-up in your traditional analysis services. So I can turn this on and we could just leave that data in our relational engine. So there's some advantages and disadvantages, of course, to that, just like you would imagine. But I'm going to go ahead and save this project. And, of course, just like any other project, if we look here at the project properties, under deployment, I can tell it which server I want to make sure I'm deploying to. So that's very important. The other option we have here is the query mode. We have varying levels of roll-app to mol-app essentially. But remember, mol-app is still off of disk. This is in memory. This is going to load, when this model gets loaded, it's going to load that data into memory on your server and then try to serve it from memory as much as humanly possible, as opposed to mol-app, which is more, the data is compressed and aggregated and all that kind of good stuff, but it only really goes into memory once it's cached, once it's being accessed by queries. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is you'll notice we have a number of different kind of task items over here. And one of them is lit up. So I'm going to go get some data from a SQL Server. Now, the best part about this is very similar to Powerpivot. A lot of you are sitting there going, but Adam, I don't run SQL Server, and we run Sybase and Teradata, and I cry a lot. So that's okay. You can run just about anything, including Informix and DB2 and multidimensional sources and reports and OData feeds and Azure Data Market datasets. I was playing with this last night. This is a really, really cool piece of functionality here. So if you haven't explored the data market, you really want to check that out. You don't have to be a Windows Azure guy, a SQL Azure Cloud person. It's just some data. Go out and get some cool data and play with it. So we're going to go get some data from SQL Server, and it's just my local SQL Server. So we'll go down and I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to go grab some data from my Contoso Retail Data Warehouse. And I'm going to go ahead and use my service account. I could use my specific Windows username, but they're essentially the same because this is my demo box and I set them up that way. I could write a query, but I'm going to select a list of tables. That's really the best way for me to go get my data. So the thing that's most important to me is this online sales table because it has a lot of sales in it. So I want my related tables. and maybe dim geography, and maybe product category and subcategory, and that's probably good enough. And we'll say I could preview this here and filter it. So if I wanted to, I could look down here at my online sales table, and there is a lot of rows in this table. There's about 12 million rows, right? So obviously, again, I'm working in client tools. I'm getting ready to process 12 million rows. Could even be more, but it's okay because that's what Power View is designed to do. So I'm going to say go for it, and we're going to import this data into our model. Now, once the data is imported into the model, you're going, well, but is it static, and how does it get updated, and all that kind of stuff. Just like regular analysis services, we just process the model. Sorry, guys, I have to take a drink. I'm losing my voice. So just like regular analysis services, we have to process the model. And you'll notice it does about anywhere from 250 to 400,000 rows a second, depending upon how wide the rows are that are coming in. The other thing you'll notice, I'm running on my machine here. I've got 24 gigs of RAM, but I'm using about, I'll probably wind up using around 10 by the time we're done. But at the same time, I'm also running two full implementations of SharePoint, 5 instances of SQL Server, and a whole host of other things on this machine. So for a regular developer machine that's got 6 to 8 gigs of RAM, you should be more than fine to work with even sizable models without having much of an issue. All right. So while this is transferring, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the features that we're going to take a look at. So we're going to process this data in. The good news is we can partition it. So we're going to go in and set up some partitions so we don't have to reprocess everything again. We can set up hierarchies. We can set up KPIs. We can do perspectives. We can set up calculated columns and calculated measures. And so I'll explain what the difference is between those items as well as soon as we get there. And this should be just about done. Once you see this data preparation stage kick off down here, that is the additional level of compression that's being put on all these rows as they come in and as they get transferred in. One of the other things that we want to make sure we point out is we can bring in data from multiple sources. So I can bring in this data, and then I can bring in if I wanted to, my geography data from my SAP system or my product catalog from my SQL system. It just depends on what your environment has available. The other nice thing about the tabular model is it supports DAX, or data access expressions. And DAX is an incredibly powerful new expression language that works very much like Excel expressions, or Excel formulas. And so it's designed for those power users that are very familiar with Excel functions but need more. So things like VLOOKUPs and things like linked tables and things of that nature, they work so much better with DAX because they're designed to scale across millions and millions and millions of rows and be able to run those calculations and do a lot of really cool things that normally we wouldn't be able to do. We can run MDX against these tabular models. Excel will do some MDX translation and run MDX against these tabular models. It won't perform quite as well as native DAX will, but I'll show you what some of that looks like as we go through. And this should be just about done processing. I'm not sure why it's taken so long this time, but thanks for your patience. The other thing that we'll do here in just a second after we get this up and we get it clean is we'll pop over here to my Powerpivot gallery, and I'll show you how we can actually create a connection here in SharePoint to that particular model that we're going to deploy. Here's one I created earlier, and be able to build some cool Power View reports, kind of like this one and this one down here. Some good examples of interesting ways to visualize your data. So we'll talk a little bit about, now that we have this model, why is that so important, and what does it do? So Steve has a question that says, can this table import staging or import from views? Yeah, you can really import from anywhere. You can even write a query to do the import. So you can pick tables or views, or you can certainly write a query, and that will work as well. All right. So if we look here, we've got all of our details telling us everything that we brought in, so that's good. And I'm going to say close, and it's going to give me a warning saying, hey, don't use the service account. That's no. I get it. I've got it. Message received. But I don't really need to worry about that too much because I know my data set and I know what I'm doing. So you'll notice we have tables now that got created down here. They're not worksheets in Tabular Model, even though they kind of look like them. They're called tables. And so we've got them all set up down here. Now the only problem is because I didn't do any previewing or filtering, for this particular table, I really need to go in here and rename these guys. So part of my cleanup is I need to go in here and take out the fact and dim prefixes. The other option I have is there is a friendly name property for these that you can set that will name them correctly when it gets imported. Whoops. And you'll notice that as I make these changes, it's making the change live to the model every time. The nice part about that is everything that I'm always working with is up to date, so you don't really run into some of the hypothetical metadata snafus that you would run into. Now, the other thing that you'll notice is I just did product category, right? That has what, 8 rows? It took the same amount of time it took to do product category, about 2 to 3 seconds, than it took to do online sales, which has 12.6 million rows. So the functionality and the scalability is pretty powerful from that perspective. So as I rename all these, one of the things I recommend is make sure that you go through and actually name these things correctly, because one of the things you're going to practice doing is starting to set up DAX expressions. And once you start referencing table names with DAX expressions, when you start renaming tables, you could have a little bit of a challenge because those expressions aren't going to work so well anymore. So now that these are renamed, there's a few other things that we can do. So if I don't want to have to process all that ever again. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come in and take a look at my partitions for my online sales table. I'm going to say, wow, that's bringing back everything, right? So instead of doing that, I'm going to say I just want to add a date filter, and I'm going to say anything between, whoops, I'm going to say 2007 and, oops, sorry about that. I'm going to say it is between 2007 and 2008. That's going to be my first partition. I'm going to rename this. And now, if I go back in here, I've got my individual partition, right? So now, what I can do is I can look at this, and you see how it's already built my query for me here? The nice part is now I can copy it. I can say where this is between 2008 and 2009. And rename my partitions here, and copy that, and do the same thing here. And one of the biggest reasons that we want to do this is because we're going to be able to process these by partition. So obviously we want things to process quickly. And so instead of processing the entire 12.5 million, I can come in here and say process partitions, process just my first partition and say OK. And now you'll notice that processing will run significantly faster. It's only going to retrieve a portion of the rows, It's going to run a lot faster for us. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at the difference between calculated columns and calculated measures. Measures are going to show up in Excel in a special grid up here that we're going to have. These calculated measures, they're going to show up here. And this is still pointed to my old model that I had up here just a little while ago. Calculated columns are going to show up right in line with our table. And the difference is calculated columns are going to be evaluated in a row context. So they're going to be evaluated based on a particular row. So you'll see only 3.7 million rows processed there and processed pretty quickly. So if we wanted to, we could say, I really would like to add a new column. So I'm going to actually rename this column. I'm going to call it profit. And I'm going to come up here actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to delete this column. And we'll just add it clean. We'll call this one profits. It'll create it on the model. And I can come up here and say, this is really equal to the sum of sales amounts minus return amount minus discount amount minus unit cost. We can close that up, and it's going to calculate that down for us, and it's going to evaluate each row. Whoops, maybe it's not. You know what? I don't think I need some in there. The row context is how things are going to be evaluated. There we go. It's going to evaluate them across the row. Now you'll notice we have a lot of the same sale item in there, but it's going to evaluate these items this way. When we create a measure works a little bit differently. We're going to create our measures down in here in our measures pane. This is one of the things I'm not crazy about in 2012. This is not the most intuitive way to create a measure. There's no, hey, go create new measure wizard. There's no nothing like that. Not that we need a wizard, but even a sign down here that says, hey, guys, come down here and create measures. That would have been pretty useful. But there is something kind of cool that we can do. So I can say sales amount, return amount, discount amount. Let's say all of these guys, I wanted the sum of those to be able to use it in a pivot table, and I wanted the average. Done. So those have all been created for me. So I did not have to go in there and write the DAX. I didn't have to do any of that. They are named, so we can go in here and edit the name of the measure. We can do all that if we want to. But we don't need to do that right now, because in order to create a KPI, which we can do, we need to have a measure. So calculations and measures, the measure has to be there in order for you to create a KPI. So before we create a KPI, let's quickly go through our columns here, and we're going to say there's going to be a number of these that we want to hide from client tools, right? And I'm going to say ETL load ID we don't need, and these guys we don't need, and the currency label. Now, this doesn't mean they're going away. It just means that our client tools themselves are not really going to see them. And so, you know, that's really very, very important when it comes to making sure that your reporting experience here is very valuable. So we can scroll over, and there's a few things here that we want to hide. And you'll notice we can do this pretty quickly just by working our way across the table here. And it's making those changes live to the model as we go through. And we're going to say these guys can all get hidden. All right, so customers clean. And what we would normally do is we'd go across the rest of these and clean things up. Sales order line number, some of this stuff is just things we're not really going to use, right? But we are going to use sales amount. And so if we say that the average of sales amount, by the way, how many of you remember writing KPIs in analysis services, having to write complicated MDX expressions to evaluate different things? And let's see, where do the available measures or functions for calculated measures come from? Are they Excel functions or MDX functions? They're DAX functions, so they're neither. They're something new specifically for tabular models and Powerpivot. I believe there are median functions available, but there's a great white paper out there called Data Access Expressions. If you just go out and Google DAX, D-A-X white paper, you'll find it pretty quickly. That's got all kinds of good stuff in it. There's a lot of DAX books that have already been published because DAX was released with Powerpivot, but we even got some new functions and things that came out specifically in 2012. Good question. So I want to pick my measure, and I'm going to say I want the average of, I'm going to do the sum of sales amounts. And we're going to say if it's in the top 90%, then it's green. If it's in the 50%, then it's going to be red, and we'll call it a day. And there's my KPI. Pretty easy stuff. Now, once we have some of this cleaned up and built, it would be a good idea to go take a look and see kind of what it looks like from a diagram perspective. So Lakshmi says, can we add or use a named query, or is it only view and table that we can load data directly from? No, you can absolutely write a query. That's not a problem. Back in that original wizard, I had an option to say, I would like to write a query. So you can do that as well, for sure. So now that we're over here in diagram view, of course we can zoom in, we can zoom out. We can choose to show measures, not measures, and you'll notice here in online sales, here's my measures down here. So if I don't show them, I can not show KPIs, all that kind of good stuff. Now, where this really comes in handy is when I come over here to date, and you guys probably remember setting attribute relationships, and you guys have watched me do that I don't know how many times, right, in webinars for performance tuning analysis services. Must have those attribute relationships if you're going to build a hierarchy. So that being said, let's come over here to date, and we're going to create a hierarchy. And I'm going to show you how much easier it is to do in the new tabular model. So we'll come over here and we'll call this calendar. And I'm going to come and grab my calendar quarter, my calendar year, my calendar month, and my date description. And I'm going to drag all those down here. So good point, Steve. The key to seeing in the diagram is a nice diagram with foreign keys. Are those already there? So of course in my data source I do have keys that are there. But one of the next things I was going to point out is if we need to create a relationship, we would absolutely create that in here. It will infer certain relationships if it can in the source. Usually it will only do that in certain relational sources, so you want to make sure that if you're using like a named query or something like that, of course it's not going to infer the relationships in some cases. So you'll want to go in and build those relationships. But yeah, absolutely, the key to a good diagram view is having those relationships. Otherwise, It's just a whole bunch of boxes sitting on the screen. So we just go in here and rename these guys. I call them guys because if they were girls, they would have just done it right the first time. They wouldn't need us to come back behind and clean up after them. And last one, we'll rename that to date. So now we have a hierarchy, and now this hierarchy will be available for us over in Excel or anywhere that we want to go reference it. I'm just going to make this a little smaller and move him out of the way. Okay, good. All right, so now that we've got our hierarchy, we've got KPIs, we've got a clean-ish model. I didn't go through all the cleaning because you guys don't want to just sit there and watch me clean. Somebody also wanted to see adding the weeks hierarchy. Sure, absolutely. So if we want, we can add another one here, and we'll call it calendar weeks. And I sure hope I have weeks in the state dimension now that I committed to doing this. So we could do a calendar year label. Oh, good. Calendar week label. Awesome. I was going to say this is going to be awkward if I don't have these in my dimension. And we can drag these down, drop them right there. Do we still need to do month as year plus month, or will it take care of it by itself? It takes care of it by itself. Now, you can adjust some of the key data, but you really shouldn't have to. It's very, very, very intelligent when it comes to that. So, you know, but if you're writing queries, if you're doing complicated stuff under the covers, you know, you may need to tweak it a little bit. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've explored every single design possibility with this. I'm sure there's some things you'll run into that might need some tweaking. But again, very simple, drag and drop, calendar weeks, and we're good to go. The next thing we have is perspectives. So for those of you who use perspectives in analysis services now, we've got them in Tabular. Woo! So remember, perspectives aren't security bound, but they're good ways to sort of group your data, visualize it, and kind of make it real for your end users. All right, so let's go ahead and deploy this model now that we've made a whole slew of changes to it. While that's deploying, I'll take a look at some questions here. It says, can we create a hierarchy with product name as the key but to display product description? Yes, you can. There's ways to do that. There's just property settings in there to do that for sure. So while this is going through and processing, one of the other things that I'll show you is some really cool functionality. So let's say you want to build this tabular model, but you're like, oh, you know, I just don't have time, and I have to get my end user, and they already know everything that's supposed to go in it, and they know Powerpivot, but they don't know tabular modeling. The whole goal is to make this essentially the same thing, right? So I can come over here to my tabular instance. I'm going to maximize this so it's not confusing. And I can right-click and actually restore a Powerpivot workbook, aptly named Restore from Powerpivot. And if we take a look at what's in there, this is a sizable workbook. So see, I've already imported a whole bunch of data in here. Whoop, whoop, there we go. Keep coming. Okay. A whole bunch of data in here in Powerpivot just to be able to, you know, do some work, just as kind of a demo. I'm not going to save that. And I'm not going to save that. That's my old Excel. And we can just restore directly from Powerpivot. I can restore it to another restore from Powerpivot and say, okay. And it's going to take all that data and it's going to go out and create a new database just like my project would. Whoops. And if we refresh, there we go. So then I can come out here and I could process it. I can do a backup and restore. I can manage it just like I would manage any other tabular database. Processing model, lazy aggregations, we've got script cache processing modes, we've got all kinds of stuff that we can go out there and change around and muck around with out there. You'll notice that the server properties here look pretty much the same. We get all the same server properties. We get a few new server properties for our tabular model friends, things like vertipack, row counts, and processing power, and things of that nature. And now that we've got this out here, and we're deployed, what I'd like to do is open up Excel. We can show you just how easy it is to connect. So I'm going to go from Analysis Services to my Tabular Instance, and I'm going to get Webinar Time. Now, what is this guy down here? Webinar Time, A. Jorgensen, GUID. That's not any good. How did that get stuck out there? Now, that's out there because it's my workplace server. So it's using that as my sandbox. As I'm making changes to the model, it's writing them out there and keeping all that in memory and using that to continue to build the model. So can you schedule a data refresh? Absolutely. It's just a regular processing job. So you treat it just like analysis services processing. And it says, are there any features available to match Excel's slice and dice? Oh, you just wait. I'm going to show you. And what reason is there to continue using traditional SSAS instead of using this tabular capability? Good question. So the biggest reason you're going to look at using traditional SSAS is tabular is designed for quick deployment, right? Smaller data sets, in the less than 20 to 10 to 20 gig. I mean, they can certainly go bigger than that, but remember, this model is going to go into RAM on the server, so you're not going to put a 2 terabyte model together. So again, it's all about functionality. There will be some people that completely switch over to tabular and never go back to multidimensional. But traditionally, this is designed to be more self-service facing because of some of the Power View things I'll show you in a minute, as well as the ability to take a Powerpivot report that a user creates and just create this from it. Multidimensional is going to be your more enterprise standardized BI. So as people really start to leverage some of these, you might want to go out and say, hey, listen, we probably need to roll this into our enterprise BI solution. So similar kind of user story to Powerpivot. So if we say next and finish, and I'm going to create a pivot chart and pivot table, and you'll notice I have all my measures right up here. So I would like the average of sales amount, average of return amount, and average of discount amount, and not a lot of returns, so I'm going to leave that one out. And I'm going to get the customer type, and from there I'm going to insert a slicer, and I'm going to say I would like calendar as my slicer and region and state as my slicers, and probably product category label. And so now what I've got is, now I could have grouped this hierarchy a little bit better, but I'm just doing it to, I'm going to remove date, and actually I'm going to remove month. And we'll just put these other guys over here. And we can move our chart a little closer. And now, you'll notice there's no lag. I'm just moving. Able to move between all of these different values very, very quickly. So we can build some pretty dynamic reports, again, very similar to the way that we do it in analysis services. Is there a way to create folders in the measures and dimensions list? So not folders per se, because it works just like when you pull data from analysis services, but you are able to drop down these fields by groupings for sure. So it's not quite folders, but it's another reason why you don't want to have 3,000 dimensions in a particular queue, because it can make it a little bit unusable. Just depends. All right, so we've built a model, we deployed it, we've restored one from Powerpivot, we have built an Excel report, so we've pretty much covered most of that general functionality that analysis services can handle. Of course, we didn't go into complicated DAX expressions and all that kind of stuff because it's almost lunchtime here on the East Coast, and I like you guys awake. I can certainly point you guys to some better resources if that's stuff that's really, really important to you. But the next thing we can do is I can go out here to Sharepoint. So what do we do with this tabular model? Well, I'm going to go out to Sharepoint, and I'm going to say, I want to connect to my tabular model. So I'm going to create a new BI Semantic model connection. And I'm going to say this is webinar. I'm just going to name it webinar. And my server name is my localhost.tabular. And my database name is webinar time. And I can't remember if I put a space, and I did put a space. So I'm going to put a space right there. And we'll say OK. And what that gives me is a new connection out here. So what can I do with that? Well, I can come out here and launch PowerView. I don't know how many of you guys have seen PowerView. Okay, so a rephrase to a previous question, are there any features in AS 2012 to match Excel's slice and dice? No, Analysis Services is not going to add slice and dice features. That's presentation layer. Analysis Services is really the engine and the modeling tool. So Excel is still the between Excel and Powerpivot with Excel, and this PowerView is really the preferred front end. Now, PowerView only works with Excel with Analysis Services 2012 in Tabular. So when we talk about upgrades to things like slice and dice, that might be something you want to kind of pay attention to right now that we're going to be looking at. So how compatible is this with other front-end tools other than Excel? Well, you can run MDX against it. So any front-end tool that can run MDX, for example, I've got this right here, and I've got this OLAP pivot table extensions plugged in here, and you can actually see the MDX that's being executed. So pretty handy tool there. So, all right, let's take a look at PowerView here before we run out of time. And so PowerView is a real simple, it's meant to do data exploration. Don't overthink PowerView. It's designed to build some really quick and easy reports that you can kind of drill into and really work with. So I'm able to come in here and say, I want to take my sales, and I'm going to take my sales amount and my discount amount, and I want to look at those by, let's say, state province name. All right, and I'm going to drag in my region country name, and I'm going to turn this into a slicer. Whoops. And I'm going to move it right over here. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to put date on it. So we'll say calendar year. And instead, I'd really like for this to be sort of a column chart, but let's make it a clustered column chart. And you'll notice I haven't really built a lot of relationships in or anything like that yet. All of this is just pre-built. It's going to pull for me. So the next thing I can do is I can add a filter area here, and I can say, well, I want to add some non-slicer kind of filters, but what I'd really like is to change this guy to different types of charts. There we go. We can bring everybody back. We can scroll through everybody as needed. Now, the other thing I can do is I can bring this and say, I really would like to just see everybody from Amsterdam Company and Anchorage and these guys, right? I can do advanced filters. Then I can hide it, and I can come up here and I can say, by the way, you'll notice these guys that are extra dark or extra bold, they're the ones that I have relationships with. Anything that's grayed out, I don't have any relationship with. So I can't do anything really with store here, but I certainly can do something with product category. So we can begin to look at, and if I wanted to, I could bring product category in over here. By the way, we also have Control-Z and we have undo. So if you don't like something that you did, we can undo it or we can redo it, which is pretty awesome in my opinion. Now, one of the things that I'd really like to do is, and whittle these down to maybe just the US. There we go. And we'll just say sales by province. So we have some other sessions on PowerView where we'll go through and actually explain kind of how all this stuff works. But this is a lot of the slice and dice additional, visualization capability that's there. We can create additional pages, additional views. But in the meantime, I'm just going to save this, and I'll call it sales by province. And so if I wanted to, I can go back to my Powerpivot gallery here and take a look at my report that I built. And I can take it in full screen mode and look specifically at just my sales amount. I can do these filters. I can do whatever I want to do. Or I can go back and look at one that I built a little bit earlier. It's got a little bit better layout. All right, so that definitely sparks some questions for you guys. So can you access PowerView outside of SharePoint? So there's only one way. Right now you cannot access it out of SharePoint for building. I'm going to show you the one way you can export this out in just a minute. They are exportable, but they're going to go essentially out to PowerPoint. So they're used for data exploration. So remember, these are not pixel perfect reports. They're for data exploration. There will be additional capabilities around exporting and all that stuff coming out later on, I think, with future versions of Office that are being released. So can we add in the year-to-date or just pull the most recent month? Absolutely. That can be added back in the model with DAX. There are a ton of time-based expressions, and they work a lot more simply than they do in MDX. Geeta, I'm glad that answered your question. So yeah, this is, by the way, PowerView is a reporting services feature. It only turns on in SharePoint with Reporting Services Enterprise and SharePoint Enterprise. So it's a creme de la creme kind of feature. But if we are to go in here and look, we have some of the same kinds of pieces of functionality in here. Very similar, slice and dice. We've got our tiles here we can filter through. But what really makes this cool is I can go over here to File, export this to PowerPoint. I can save it, and I'm going to go ahead and save all my images, and I'm going to overwrite this webinar PowerPoint that I have out here. And the thing that's really cool about being exported to PowerPoint, you're probably like, PowerPoint, well, that's kind of lame, right? Well, it is and it isn't. So I can go out here and open up this webinar.pptx, and this data right here, if I were to run a slideshow, I can move this, by the way, to any other PowerPoint presentation that I need. It's actually going to render this report right here in my PowerPoint slide. And if I come down here and I say click to interact, it's going to load the data connection in the background. And I'm taxing my machine now, but because I've got the server and everything running on it. But at the same time, now I'm able to come in here and see. Whoops! I clicked on my slide, not my my graph there. So as this loads, this is really great for things like just board meetings, management meetings, strategy kinds of things. You can go in and just get a high-level view of what your data really looks like. And again, we're able to slice. All the slicing works. We can put images in here and use those as tiles to slice with. You guys can see kind of a rough version of that back here on my Powerpivot gallery. I have a half-complete report that I'll show you really quick that I was building earlier. This report 1 right here. And this is using some samples that are freely available from Microsoft for 2012. They're called the Hello Picnic 2012 kind of samples. So we've got the ability to use some of these images as particular slicers, and you'll notice the images actually will change. And we can bake those in and turn them into slicers and tiles for the report. So with that, that's everything that I had for you guys. This has been a fairly in-depth intro. Most of this stuff is stuff you want to go kind of explore on your own. There's a couple additional questions in here that say, can Powerpivot reports be scheduled? So I think you mean Power View, and they're not going to be scheduled, or they don't work like traditional reporting services reports. They're not pixel-perfect reports. It's for data exploration. So it's for a power user that wants to go in and build out some visualization around some data. This is not going to be scheduled and emailed out. The data will always be up to date based on the tabular model that you're connected to. The tabular model data can be refreshed inside of Sharepoint with normal Powerpivot data refresh. And so if we take a look at that, not my Google News feed, we can come in here and, for example, for this particular one that I have here, or the one that I deployed, we can configure data refresh, and we get all of our options. Now, I don't have an external data source on that one, but external data source being like a SQL Server database or an Oracle system or something like that. But you will get a different schedule based on, if you uncheck all data sources, you can set up different schedules for that, and really get some cool functionality there. So, Michael says, there a guide or document that advises which reporting tool to use when? There's lots of stuff that Microsoft has put out on MSDN. They've got guidelines and user stories and all that kind of stuff. They're very heavily managing all the messaging around this kind of stuff. So it's definitely the place I would check out. Do PowerView connections use data sources or the SharePoint secure store like Excel services? No, they're going to use that BISM connection that I created, Intro to Tabular and Webinar, and then based on where that connection points, that's what they're going to use. So they're going to resolve just back to that tabular model, and then you can secure the individual connection if you need to. Who will create the tabular model, power user or technical person? Either, really, because if you want the power user to create it, if you just don't have time, they can go build it all in Powerpivot, and then you just import it. So we can go back in here to Visual Studio, and I can say that apparently I have some dialogue that's up that I'm not catching. There we go. So I can come up here and say File, New Project again, and I can import from Powerpivot. So I can actually go out here and say, I want to go get my Restore from Powerpivot doc, the one I restored, and I can go get that and just import it, and it'll create a project for me. So you can have the end user do most of the work, let them do a lot of it, and then you can come in here and go, yeah, that looks right, or oh no, we don't want to share that column, or birth date, no, that's proprietary, that's personal information, we got to remove that. You know, you can do, you know, the 20% out of the 80-20 and begin to, you know, be much more efficient, and then we can either deploy it as a tabular model, or you know, essentially deploy it out and then connect to it with Power BI reports and things of that nature. So, a lot of good functionality and a lot of cool things that we can do with this new technology. So, guys, if you have questions, you know, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, shoot me an email. I do my best to get back to you guys an email in a day or two. So I definitely don't ignore them. I flag them, and we'll get to them as quick as we can. I know the webinar is going to be posted in the next couple of days, usually by the end of the week. Rachel and the team are just rock stars at getting that done. So, guys, thank you so much for all your time. Thanks for hanging out, and that's all I had.
All right, great. Thank you for a great session, Adam. And I'll pull this report and send it to you so that any questions that you didn't have a chance to answer, you can have. And thank you, everyone, for attending it. And we hope to see you again on Tuesday and Thursday for our free training at 11 Eastern Standard Time. All right, everyone, have a great rest of the week.